are you here on this earth? And why is your parish experiencing the challenges it is experiencing? And what are you going to do about that? If you're looking for the answer to some of those questions, then you've come to the right place. My name is Bill Marianis from Atlanta, Georgia, and I'm here to help ignite the flame of true Christian stewardship in your life and in the life of your parish or faith-based community. We are going to record 5 programs that we're going to share with you. The first is entitled, We've Gotten Stewardship All Wrong, where we're going to explore the facts and figures about what's actually happening with Christian churches in America. The second program is entitled, What is True Christian Stewardship?, where we're going to study not only Scripture, but all the more current research that's been done to help us understand what true stewardship is. The third program is devoted to how do we best implement true Christian stewardship in our parishes, churches, and faith-based communities. The fourth program is going to be where we explore a new parish operational paradigm and strategic planning as a tool to re-energize and revitalize our parishes and churches. And in the fifth segment, well, we're going to have some fun. After 5 years of traveling over 160,000 miles all over the country, I've learned a lot of questions that folks have. And so we're going to have a question and answer session where we explore some of the most important questions and answers to how you can ignite the flame of true Christian stewardship in your life and in your parish or faith-based community. So please fasten your seatbelts, return your seatbacks and tray tables to the locked and upright position because we're ready to go on an amazing journey. Now, of course, stewardship is based on an important underpinning of Christian gospel from the Holy Gospel, as well as the life and teachings of our Lord and Savior Jesus Christ. But there's also some philosophy that enters into it, and I want to start by sharing 2 pieces of it with you. The first is a paraphrase of a quote from Mark Twain, who once said, "The 2 most important days of your life are first, the day you were born, and second, the day you figure out why. Why are you here? Why have you been given all the gifts that you have been given by your Father and your Creator? Why did you have all the life experiences that you had? For what purpose are you here to fulfill?" You have a unique stewardship calling. And as you start to live your unique stewardship calling through your parish or your church, you can help revitalize your life and the life of your parish. But we're going to discuss that more later. The second philosophical underpinning comes from the great Greek philosopher Socrates, who once said, "You cannot teach adults new things. You can merely create the environment in which they discover the truth for themselves." So in the course of these 5 programs, we hope to create the environment in which you can discover the truth about your unique stewardship calling and how you can live that stewardship calling along with others to revitalize the life of your parish. Now, in the tradition of Socrates, who taught by asking questions, I want to begin with 2 questions for you. The first question, do you believe in John 3:16? Do you believe in John 3:16? In John 3:16 we learn, "For God so loved the world that he gave his only begotten Son, that whosoever shall believeth in him shall not perish, but shall have everlasting life." And it's that last part that I want you to focus on. Do you believe in the story of the resurrection? Do you believe in the possibility of heaven? Do you believe there's anything after this life? Now that's a fair question, because in his book American Grace, Harvard researcher Robert Putnam did a nationwide survey and found that in America today, about 80% of Americans believe in God, but only 52% of Americans believe there's anything after this life. So do you believe that you have the opportunity to not perish, but have everlasting life? Now, if you answer that question yes, then you're ready for the second question. Are you ready for it? If this were the exact moment when you were called to meet your Maker, is the state of your faith and the body of works you have accomplished sufficient to assure you of the right answer for all of eternity? If it is, relax and sit back, because I don't have anything for you. But if you're like me and you realize there's more you can and should do, then please stay focused, because we are going to ignite the flame of true Christian stewardship in your life and in your parish. Now, this entire Igniting the Flame of True Christian Stewardship program and the supporting PowerPoint is made available in two places. My website, which is all free, stewardshipcalling.com, and by going to myocn.net, where you can actually review this entire program, pause, rewind, and learn it at your own speed and pace. So let's get started with part number one. We've gotten stewardship all wrong. We start by looking at definitions. When we think about the definition of stewardship, that's where we made our big mistake. We've allowed stewardship to become a synonym for just money. It's just show me the money and the financial side of it, when indeed that's only one small part of the entire puzzle. Stewardship, I believe, is real simple. It's what you do with the gifts God gave you. Let me repeat that. It's what you do with all of the gifts God gave you. So in one essence, it's all about you. But it's really all about God, because He, as your Father and Creator, bestowed upon you some extraordinary gifts. The question is, what are you doing with those gifts? Are your financial resources part of the gifts? Well, of course they are. But are they the most important part? Not really. It is your talents and your abilities, the skills, the wisdom, the judgment, the opportunity to make a difference in people's lives that is amongst the greatest gifts that you've been given. So what are you doing with those gifts? Because everything we have is God's gift to us for our use here on this earth. And while your money is certainly one of those gifts, it's a renewable asset. Look, if I asked you to give me $100, at the end of the day, it's really no big deal, because you could go back to work and over time make that back again. But when I ask you to give me your time, well, that's a non-renewable asset. It's your most valuable asset, because you're never going to get that back again. At least not on this earth. And so why are we spending so much effort to harvest that which is fungible and renewable, and not that which is most lasting and impactful? And that's what we're going to focus on as we go through it. Because we've established paradigms, which are things that we use to screen data in the way we live our lives. And my goal for you through these programs is for you to experience a fundamental paradigm shift in your view of your stewardship calling. You know, it started for me by about 8 years ago, when I finally realized that everything I thought I knew about stewardship was absolutely wrong. I'd spent over 30 years raising money for Christian churches, Christian schools, nonprofit organizations. I have been blessed to work on capital campaigns that have raised over $100 million and annual campaigns that raised over $25 million, working with some of the best fundraising consultants, helping develop programs and build buildings. And I thought I knew everything there was to know about it. And then finally, I was awoken and realized that what I really didn't understand is what stewardship was all about, because I had equated it, like so many of us do, with just raising money. My brothers and sisters, stewardship is a spiritual expression of faith. It ultimately implicates salvation. It's the way you live your life. So really, stewardship is all about giving thanks, which really means that every day ought to be Thanksgiving Day. Let me give you a scientific perspective behind this. You, each and every one of us, have a unique genetic composition. We've had a unique upbringing. Even if we were raised in the family with our siblings, our experiences were different. Our life experiences were different. Our skills and gifts are different. Well, why did our Creator, who could have made anything or anybody in His image and likeness, choose to make us in His image and likeness and give us all of these unique skills, gifts, and abilities if He didn't have something particularly in mind for us? And the power of the creation of our God, of each and every one of us, was made more clear to me when I actually saw some research that I was blessed to be able to see by my daughter, who got her PhD in genetics. And what you're looking up on the screen is something that I thought was really fascinating when she showed it to me. These are the cells that exist in your gut right now. This is what it looks like when it's blown up at a cellular level. And if you look at the upper corner, you see a circle around 3 little bitty cells. Those are stem cells. Stem cells are cells that recreate other cells within that organism. And in the bottom corner, you see a personification of the little white dots that you see in every one of the cells. That's the DNA, the genetic material, if you will. Now, this was interesting, but when she showed me the exact same image magnified a different way is when I really realized the enormity of God's creation. This is the exact same picture, but looking at it from a different perspective. And you see those little white spaghetti noodles that seem to be running through the cells within your guts. Those are enteric neurons. They are, forgive the liberal arts version, pipelines to your brain. By one measure, there are over 100 million neurotransmitters that transmit signals between our gut and our brains. Which, interestingly enough to me, really means that when someone says, "What's your gut say?" or "Follow your gut," they're actually giving you pretty good scientific advice. Now, this isn't a science discussion, but I think it's incredible to look at God's creation and to realize that He has hardwired us in a way in which we can fully integrate every aspect of our lives. For what purpose? That's the question. In St. Paul's letter to the Romans in 12 verses 6 through 14, we hear him say, "Brethren, having gifts that differ according to the grace given to us, let us use them." And he said, "For those in service by serving, for those who teach by teaching, for those who contribute in your liberality." The point of the scripture passage is each and every one of us have been given unique gifts by our Creator. And when we start to live our callings, we can start to fulfill our stewardship obligations to God and ourselves. And when we do it within the context of a church community, we actually create the opportunity for true stewardship to reside. And in Matthew 10:38, we're confronted with very clear instructions from our Lord and Savior when He said, "He who does not take his cross and follow is not worthy of me." Christ is asking us to take our cross, everything with us, all of our skills and all of the good abilities that we have, as well as the challenges we have overcome, and to follow Him. And it is to that ministry that I'm asking you to devote your life and your church life. Now, I always like to start my programs with what I euphemistically call an intelligence test. Between you and me, it's not really an intelligence test. It's a perception test. But here's how it's going to work. In a second on the screen, you're going to see a quote. And all I need you to do is count the number of times the letter F appears in that quote. That's the letter F as in Frank. See, it's not really very hard. So here we go. Here's the quote. Please count the number of times the letter F appears. Not very hard. It's pretty easy. These are all words you're familiar with. The saying may not make any sense to you, but you can count it. Now, when I deliver the Igniting Flame of True Christian Stewardship program in live, I ask people to raise their hands if they got 1 F or 2 Fs, or they only saw 3 Fs or 4 Fs or 5 Fs or 6 Fs or 7 Fs and above. Here's what I've found in hundreds of times of doing this. I will always get a couple of people who found only 2 Fs or 4 Fs or 5 Fs. I'm not sure what they saw or what's going on in their minds, but I can tell you that overwhelmingly in the hundreds of times of administering this perception test, the number one answer is 3. But the correct answer is 6. And if you look at what's up on your screen, you'll see the 6 Fs, but I've now circled the 3 times the word of appears. And here's what's happening. Our brains see the word of, O-F, but it translates it to O-V. Now, I jokingly say this was the problem because our teachers taught us phonics, and in phonics the word of looks like O-V to our brains. Now, there's actually a word that describes this phenomenon, and I jokingly say when you're speaking to someone who speaks Greek, pronounce the word carefully. The word is scotoma. What a scotoma is when your eyes see something, but your brain translates it a different way. It is a perception. We all have scotomas. We all have perceptions. They're shaped by our knowledge and our experiences. But sometimes what we think we saw isn't exactly what we saw. Now, I like to joke and say if you've ever been to a church meeting or a General Assembly meeting, you know what I'm talking about when multiple people see the same things but interpret it different ways. Now, the moral of the story is really, in essence, to try and get you to look beyond your scotomas, look beyond the paradigms that you've built about stewardship. Folks, it's not just about your money. It's a small part, but not just about your money. It's about what are you doing with all the gifts God gave you. And when we all come together and use those gifts for God's greater glory and for our salvation, we create a vibrant church community that can fundamentally change the paradigm in our communities. Now, I was blessed to be able to spend the last 5 years traveling all over our country, delivering the Igniting the Flame of True Christian Stewardship program, and I've traveled over 160,000 miles, and in doing that, I've had the privilege of looking at and working with and talking to parishioners and parishes all over the country. And I've discovered some common phenomenon. I think what's happening in the Christian church of today in America is we have a sin challenge. And I don't just mean sin in that way, although we probably have that also. I'm big into acronyms. If you look at the map, you'll see just a smattering of the cities that I've been able to deliver the Igniting the Flame of True Christian Stewardship program. But the sin challenge really breaks down as follows. The S stands for a spirituality challenge. The I stands for an income challenge. And the N stands for a numbers challenge. But when you actually look at it and carefully explore it, what you find is that the root cause of all of our spirituality, income, and numbers challenges is really a stewardship challenge. Our people, our parishioners, our faithful neither understand nor necessarily practice what true Christian stewardship is all about. And the purpose of this program is to help you understand that and then to ignite the flame within your lives. But I've also discovered that it's important to share the facts and figures with people because we all have those perceptions. Remember those scotomas? We think we know what's going on. So I've gathered an enormous amount of data that I've tried to summarize in this program. More amounts of the data can be found on the Stewardship Calling website. But let's start with the fundamental challenge. We have what I refer to as an unemployment and an underemployment challenge in our churches today. An unemployment and an underemployment, and I don't mean in their work lives. Let me define my terms. The unemployment challenge are those parishioners who are not involved in any ministry or services or activities of our parish. Maybe we only see them twice a year. Maybe we don't even see them that often. They are completely unemployed in living their callings through their churches. And they are not participating in the offerings, services, sacraments, and liturgies of our churches. The second group is the underemployed. We see them around sometimes and they may be involved in one or a few activities, but they're not involved anywhere near as much as they could be. And once we can learn to re-engage our underemployed and get them more active and actually engage and employ our unemployed, we will have those vibrant church communities that we all love and seek. So let me share with you just a smattering of the data of the spirituality challenge, the income challenge, and the number challenge. First, the spirituality challenge. It begins with a thought-provoking question or thought. See, in the business world, we have a saying, you get what you measure. So if you're in the business of manufacturing widgets, guess what you get? A lot of widgets. In my day job, I'm a lawyer. We charge by the hour, so guess what we get? A lot of billable hours. So I know the churches aren't in business, but if we were to think about it in that context or that construct, what business are the churches in? Are they in the business of just building buildings? Are they in the business of just producing documents? No, they're actually in a much more important business. They are in the business of spirituality, promoting spirituality, engaging our parishioners in the spiritual living of their callings according to the teachings of our Lord and Savior Jesus Christ. So if we are in the spirituality business, then how are we measuring that? And unfortunately, the reality is in most of our parishes, we're not. We do a really good job of measuring financial stewardship. Oh, we can produce spreadsheets and financial statements. And occasionally we'll measure participation. But are we even asking the question, how are we doing with regard to the spiritual health and well-being of our parishioners? Let me give you some data sources that show you what's going on out there. And folks are actually starting to ask that question. Now, there's a lot of folks that are actually starting to study this. One of them is the Barna Research Group, and they've done some pioneering work. I'm going to give you the Bill Marianis CliffsNote version, a lot of this data, so that we can move through it quickly. The conclusion of one of their recent nationwide studies is that despite having more born-again Christians today than 10 years ago, America is spiritually stagnant. We have gotten spiritually stagnant. And if you look at the facts and figures that help form that conclusion, you'll see some of the data. In a period of 1 decade almost recently completed, what they found is that regular Bible reading dropped from 45% of Christians, people who said they were Christians, to only 37% of Christians regularly reading the Bible. Volunteering in churches during that same period dropped from 27% of the people who said they were part of a church community to only 20%. 1 in 5 are actually volunteering in their churches. Church attendance dropped from about 49%, just under half, to 42%. And at the same time, 40% of Christians in America neither read the Bible nor attend church in a typical week. If you did either, you wouldn't have been included in that statistic, but 40% of Americans neither attend church nor even pick up the Holy Gospel in a typical week. And 70% of the Christians are not involved in any small group that meets for spiritual purposes, part of that underemployed constituency, which left the Barna Research Group to conclude that today in America, there are over 10 million Christians, people who had identified themselves as Christians, who are essentially unchurched. Now, the Gallup organization has also done some really great research in the area of spirituality in America. What you're seeing on the screen in front of you is a map of the United States. It's kind of the spirituality version of the red state, blue state map, only it's color-coded in green. The darker the color green, the more religious the people are in that state. The lighter the color, the less religious. Now, I'm from Atlanta, Georgia. We're very dark green, which means we are very religious. As you get further northeast and further west, you start to see the map lighten up. Now, I don't want anybody to draw a conclusion from there to say that it's easier or harder in any one place, because the reality of it is, for those of you that live in light green states or white states, the point is there are a whole lot of people out there that could use what our church has to offer if only we will reach out to them and evangelize and bring them in. And for those of you in the green states, well, maybe there's another opportunity for you to take those people who may not be as engaged and make them more engaged in your church life community. Now, part of the questions, or one of the questions that Gallup has been asking for over 50 years to try and determine the color of the state is demonstrated in the slide that's in front of you right now. The question they ask is, how important would you say religion is in your own life? You had three choices. You could say it was very important, fairly important, or not important at all. If you look at the top line, the dark green line, what you see is that in 1952, 80%, almost 80% of Americans said religion was very important in their life. And that line has declined steadily to the point where it's about 55% in the early 2010 cycle over here. We've gone from 3/4 of Americans who said religion was very important in their lives to just a little over half that say it's very important. Look at the inverse, the line on the bottom in light green. These are the people that said religion was not at all important in their lives. In the early 50s, it was only 5% of Americans. Now, in our time, it's almost quadrupled to nearly 20%. We see this in everything we look at, and we say spirituality has declined steadily, precipitously in the United States today. Now, there's another wonderful book, and it's one of the resources that I recommend in the Stewardship Calling website. It's called Vanishing Boundaries, The Religion of Mainline Protestant Baby Boomers. And I'm going to give you again the Bill Marianis Cliff's Note version of a couple of conclusions that they reached that I think is universally true of Christian churches. First, any church that places few demands on its congregants and does not pay attention to the ultimate question of faith will find itself on the sidelines. Notice what they're saying. We have to create demands on our parishioners and focus them on the ultimate question of faith. One of the second conclusions they reached was looking at the factors in the decline was the emphasis on evangelism or invitation among mainline Christian churches in comparison to some of the evangelical churches. It's just something we have not done to the extent we should, and we'll talk more about that later. L. Weinsman, who's the group leader of the faith community's practice within Gallup, was once led to conclude that the level of engagement amongst congregants is of key importance. How engaged are they in their church communities? How fully employed, not unemployed or underemployed? Now, he also noted that the level of engagement in their congregation sometimes has little to do with theology or doctrine, but a lot to do with the way they interact with and engage in the lives. So even if you have, if you will, forgive the crudeness of the business analogy, even if you have the product wrong, if you have the right delivery system, you can get people engaged. But that's really not what a church ought to do. It ought to have the right product and the right delivery system. And that's really what we're going to be focusing on. Now, this led to a conclusion that they reached in looking at the factors in the downward slide in mainline churches. And basically from all the data that Gallup and others had accumulated, they realized that the following four conclusions were critically important if a denomination wants to experience growth in both the depth and breadth of its followers. Not just getting them in the door, but getting them fully engaged in the spiritual life of the community. Here are four factors that they focused on. Number one, you gotta focus on the ultimate question of faith. There are plenty of organizations that get people in the front door, and after a while they realize there's no there, and they're not feeling spiritually fed or nourished, and they go out the back door some number of years later. So first, you've got to focus on the ultimate question of faith. Second conclusion they reach from all the data, you gotta place demands on your congregants and engage them. If you look at what our Lord and Savior did in everything He modeled, He went to the apostles and He said, you stop fishing. You let the dead bury their dead. You come follow me. Go all in. He made demands on them. And in the way He taught us to live a perfectly spiritual life. That's making a demand. That's the second component that they focused on for a growing, vibrant church community. Third is building youth programs. There was another study that was done recently released that looked at all of the most rapidly growing churches in America. And they studied what was there in them. And they found a lot of the things you would expect to be found. But one of the findings that I thought was interesting from this study was there were two ministries that were found in 100% of the most rapidly growing parishes. Now again, a lot of ministries that you would expect, but there were two that were in every one of the most rapidly growing parishes. The first is vibrant and dynamic youth ministries. Again, the point that Gallup realized. Building youth programs. The second was interesting to me also. Dynamic marital ministries. Premarital, during marriage, postmarital, whether divorce or after death. The fourth thing they found present in all of the most rapidly growing parishes are building a program of evangelism and invitation. Do people feel comfortable when they come into your house? Now, in the course of these 5 programs in Igniting the Flame of True Christian Stewardship, we're going to give you the tools and techniques to make sure that you focus on the ultimate question of faith, that you create demands on your parishioners, that you build youth programs, and that we stress a program of invitation and evangelism. But let me stop for a little digression on the youth challenge, because I think these are one of the facts and figures that really astounded me and quite frankly challenged me. The Pew Forum, that it does some of the most amazing research out there, in their Religion in the Millennial Generation study, concluded the following thing. They said the millennial generation, those born after 1980, is less religiously affiliated than any previous generation. Their conclusion was that about 1 in 4 Americans between the ages of 18 and 29 do not affiliate with any particular religious group, which is far and away the most religious disaffiliation we've seen, double the age of disaffiliation from amongst the baby boomers. So we put up on the screen here the summary results of that extraordinary Pew study. Let me break it down for you so you can look at it. Each of the lines represents a different generation, and it's color-coded. And that's what you see along the y-axis are the percentage of disaffiliation, from 0% disaffiliated all the way up to 40% not affiliated with the religion. Along the other axis, we see the various decades. So we're measuring their level of disaffiliation over time. Now, the line at the bottom that you see is the greatest generation, those born before 1928. They stayed relatively constantly at between 3 to 5% disaffiliated over many, many decades. The yellow line above them is the silent generation. The line above them is the baby boomer generation, so many of us. And then the kind of red line above them is the Gen Xers, who we used to hate until the millennials showed up. That one dot that you see at the top at the 26% mark is the millennial level. 26% of millennials are not engaged in any religious experience and faith-based community. Now, if you look at the baby boomer line, you'll see a circle around 13. That's the middle line. That's the percentage of baby boomers who were not affiliated religiously when we were the same age as the millennials. What that shows you is that literally in one generation, the level of religious disaffiliation has doubled from 13% to 26%. And those trends are continuing. My brothers and sisters, if you don't believe that the Christian church in America's house is on fire, then we're not looking at the data the same way. We have to be the firemen and firewomen that put out the fire of crisis and problem and reignite the flame of stewardship. Now, the 4 youth challenges I like to give everybody is really simple 4 questions. Number 1, are there any colleges or universities in your area? And of course, pretty much everybody has to answer yes to that. Question 2, are there any students of your faith tradition that go to those colleges and universities but are not from your hometown? Kids that came to that school of your faith tradition from some other city. And everybody pretty much has to answer that question, yes. Third question, do you know all of them? And very few people can answer that question, yes. Which leads to the 4th question, what are you going to do about it? There's so many wonderful opportunities that we have to reach out and engage the young people. And in so doing, embrace them. I've had opportunities to do that in my own hometown of Atlanta, where I decided I was going to reach out to the Orthodox kids that came into schools. And I found out about a young girl who was attending one of the universities. And I called her one Sunday and I said, look, my wife and I are here. We want to welcome you to Atlanta. If there's anything we can do for you, by all means, please let us know. And if you need a ride to church or if you can't get home for Easter, you're going to come to our house. And she was just so wonderfully happy to have that. And I said, look, if your car breaks down and you don't even know a mechanic, you give me a call. We'll help you figure that out. A few days later, I was in my office and got a call from her father who said, my daughter called me after you called, and she was amazed at the welcome that she received, and quite frankly, so were we. And then he said the magic words. I had one of my law partners was a politician, and he said, you know, the way you can control someone is to do something for their kids. It's also the right thing to do. And so this father said to me, he said, what can I do for you? And I said to him, well, you can do the same thing in your hometown. You can welcome the kids that are going to the colleges and universities in your area. And he was real funny because he said, well, you know, I don't know if I can do that. I'm a busy surgeon. Now, I had been talking to this guy for less than 5 minutes on the telephone, and I said, BS, only forgive me, I actually used the words. And he said, what'd you say? And I said, man, I'm a busy lawyer, but I found the time to call your daughter. And he laughed for a second. He said, you know what? You're right. My wife and I can do that. My brothers and sisters, so can each and every one of you in your church community. If you don't have a ministry that's reaching out to the young people that are coming to the colleges and universities and welcoming them and embracing them and in finding opportunities to serve them, then you're not really doing all that we could and should do. And what you'll find is many of those young men and women are going to stay in your communities. And if you'll just reach out to them, they will become vibrant and active members of your faith-based community. Just one of the takeaways from this Igniting the Flame of True Christian Stewardship program is for you to rethink your youth ministry program. Now, I've got a lot more spirituality data, but we don't have enough time. So let me switch over to the I in the sin challenge, the income challenge. Now, part of this problem has been exacerbated because a lot of the faithful think, well, that's the clergy's job to go out and raise the money and do this. And you think about the numbers and you figure, well, there's no way they could possibly reach out to everybody. But there's even a bigger problem there. If you look at the research of what is happening at the seminaries and the educational institutions that are training our extraordinary clergy, what we find out is they're not being trained in financial matters or fundraising or even operational matters, because they're training them on what to do from a spiritual perspective and the liturgical life of your faith-based community and how you actually run the ministries of your faith-based community, but not the operational side of it. In a survey that was done, they found that 77% of U.S. clergy rated their theological experience as very or extremely satisfied on the question of training on theological and liturgical issues. But only 7% of them said they were very or extremely satisfied with the training and education they got on financial duties or operational duties. And in another survey that was done, they found that 85% of U.S. clergy were not trained on the theory of stewardship and had no books on Christian stewardship in their libraries. So it clearly can't just be the clergy's responsibility. But let's look at the hard facts of what's going on from the income perspective. Yes, I know that the United States has had a recession of sorts that's impacted a lot of people. No question about it. And if you are one of those people, boy, I know that the impact has been great on you. But let's look at it holistically. And what we find is that just in the period of time, we're looking at one completed year from 2010 to 2011 as an example. Individual charitable donations rose by 4% in 1 year. It went up. But in that very same time period, individual donations to churches and religious bodies declined by 1.7%. And that was the second year in a row at that exact same percentage of decline, even though it's been declining steadily for a period of time. So what we see is that donations are going up because, frankly, disposable income is going up across the board. Maybe not to you individually, but generally speaking, it's going up. But giving to churches is going down. And when they looked at the cause as to why do we see donations to churches and religious institutions declining steadily over the last decade, they really found three fundamental root causes. Number one was increased competition from a proliferating number of non-religious organizations. Number two, a decline in church attendance. Again, part of that disengagement problem. And number three is a general lack of understanding and sophistication within religious organizations regarding the aspect of pursuing the income part of the stewardship challenge. Now, as I said, the income piece is certainly one piece. We talk about the 3 T's of stewardship. I actually think there's a fourth one, the tithe, and we will talk about that. But the 3 T's you're familiar with are time, talents, and treasures. And we've been relatively unsophisticated vis-a-vis our other nonprofit competitors in how we pursue the receipts of the treasure challenge. When you look at the facts of the statistics that are out there with regard to generosity, there were 2 that struck me as very, very important, very, very critical, and very, very problematic. First, people are giving a lower percentage of their income to churches in the 2000s than they did either in the Great Depression or in the 1920s. Let me repeat that. People are giving a less percentage of their money to churches today than we did during the Great Depression in the 1920s. Clearly, 2 of the toughest economic times in America's history, we were giving a greater percentage of our income than we are doing today. That demonstrates an acute income challenge. The second fact that came out there that is pretty obvious when you actually step back and look at the demographic data is that the number of nonprofit 501c3 entities out there that are soliciting volunteers and funds has more than doubled in the last decade, whereas the number of churches has remained relatively constant. We're seeing well over 600,000 nonprofit institutions out there and more every day, but the number of churches in America has stayed relatively constant, somewhere in the mid to high 300,000s in terms of 380,000 communities out there across all faith-based traditions. And if you look at the giving levels, which you'll see from some research that was done by, and there's a series of really good folks doing this research, by the way, out there, is that in 1985, religious entities received 53% of people's charitable donations. So when you looked at all your charitable donations in 1985, over half of that money went to religious institutions. By the year 2007, those same religious institutions were receiving only 33% of people's charitable donations. So again, generally, disposable income is going up, generosity is going up, but the portion of our generosity that is going to churches has been declining steadily for many decades. Now, there are a series of other great sources that have done research and studies on this subject. And again, it's all recontained in the stats and facts section of stewardshipcalling.com. I encourage you to look at that free website for that source. But let me just give you 3 conclusions of some definitive studies. 1, a nationwide study of Christian parishioners, all denominations. Here was the bottom line conclusion. They found that nearly all of the parishioners that they interviewed said they, in fact, could give more than they do and believe they should give more than they do. In other words, they get it. They understand they're not doing as much as they can from the income side. So it's not like we have to convince them of that. That's what they already believe. So what we need to figure out is, well, why aren't they doing that? And during the course of this entire Igniting the Flame of True Christian Stewardship program, we're going to share with you why they're not doing that and how you're going to turn that around. The second thing that they found in one of these nationwide studies is that the number one reason that both priests, clergymen, and parishioners, the laity, found as the major barrier to Christian generosity is the secular, individualist, consumerist nature of today's American society. It's what I jokingly refer to as the Burger King phenomenon. Some of you are old enough to remember that phenomenal ad campaign by Burger King, "Have it your way," right? And when you go into a Burger King restaurant, You are their customer. And we know, all of us know, that the customer is always right. The problem is we have allowed that same consumerist mentality to enter into our religious practices within our churches and faith-based communities. In other words, if you don't like the priest's sermon, or you've got a fuss at the president of the council, you think it is within your prerogative to withhold your financial contributions because it's your money. Just like if you were at a restaurant and you didn't like the food, you'd send it back and hope they didn't spit in it when it came back to you. But the reality of it is, my brothers and sisters, those financial resources that we all have, they're gifts to us by God. Sure, we worked hard to generate them and earn them, but ultimately without God's gift, without God's grace, without the skills and abilities He gave us, we wouldn't even have the opportunity to do that. So who are we to negotiate with God and say, I'm not sharing that with you? But it is that secular, consumerist society that we have generated in today's America that is causing a challenge with regard to generosity in the churches. And we're going to talk about how we fix that. The other thing that came about as a result of some of the nationwide study is that they found that the annual level, the value of charitable gifts from those who attend church weekly is on average about $2,210 per person, or per individual that they study, right? But for those that didn't attend church regularly, it was only about $642. So it's really a fourfold increase from those who regularly attend church. Go back to one of the earlier statistics we cited that the Gallup organization said is one of the real problems that are facing Christian churches is we're not getting them in the pews. And as a result of that, we're losing that opportunity to engage them in every aspect, including giving them the opportunity to contribute financially. But from a factual synopsis of a variety of different sources, what we come to find out is when we look at our lives, virtually 90% of churches in America have no stewardship plan whatsoever. None. Many of your churches might be in that same case. What we're trying to do with this Igniting the Flame of True Christian Stewardship program is give you the tools and techniques. Because when we get to part 3, we're going to actually give you 3 fundamental principles that you can apply in your parish's life. We're going to give you 2 tactics and a 9-step process. When we look at Americans today, what we find out is that on average, Americans spend 50 hours per week watching TV, about 50 hours working, about 12 hours watching TV, and only 1 hour per week on religious and volunteer activities. That's it. Whether you're volunteering or working in the church or even going to church, it's on average 1 hour a week. And 37% of churchgoers give 0 to their churches financially. Now, some folks have said, well, that's truer today because of the recession that we've been going through. But when they did studies, what they found is that, and again, we're still studying this recession, but in 8 of the last 12 recessions, charitable giving actually went up in the recession, not down. And you'd say, well, why would they give more in a recession? Well, the answer is because people see the need. They see other people hungry or hurting or in need, and they recognize that they've been given gifts, and as a result, they respond more generously. The second piece of data that I thought was very, very interesting, and it will foreshadow something that we're going to teach in the later part of the program, is congregations with fewer committees are more likely to struggle finding volunteers regardless of the size. Now get your head around that one. If you have fewer committees or ministries, it's going to be harder for you to get volunteers. When you take a second, think about it and say, now why would that be true? Well, the answer is pretty simple. It's because if you only had 4 ministries, there's only 4 things that your church is doing. Then if I'm not really good at any of those 4 things, or I don't feel called to help in any of those 4 areas, I've got nothing to do vis-a-vis my church. Show up on church on Sunday maybe, and that's about it. But if you proliferate a massive number of ministries and activities, then you have, if you will, something for everybody to deploy their God-given gifts. And so one of the techniques we're going to teach you is how do you do that in the context of a Christian church? How do you create and become a ministry-based organization? The other part of this from a financial perspective is some interesting research that the Pew Forum also did. And you'll see up on your screens in front of you the U.S. population broken down by religious tradition. And the colors signify the annual income by band. So the darkest color are those people that make $100,000 a year or more in the United States, $100,000 per year. The next color of dark blue is people between 75 and 100,000. As we get lighter, it's people who make 50 to 75,000. Lighter still is 30 to 50,000. And then finally, those that make less than 30,000. And you see the percentage of folks of each faith-based ethnic tradition on the one axis who make those various percentages of income. And you'll see, for example, from this chart that the religious group that has the highest level of income attainment in the United States are the Hindus, followed by our Jewish brothers and sisters, and then my faith-based tradition, the Orthodox, going on down to the Buddhists, the mainline Protestants, the Mormons, the unaffiliateds, the Catholics, the evangelical Protestants, Muslims, Jehovah's Witnesses, and ending with the historically black Protestant churches. Now, this is a very interesting piece of data that you can look at vis-a-vis your faith-based community and kind of do some assessment with regard to capacity for giving. I'll share with you the one that I did for the Orthodox community, and particularly the Greek Orthodox community. I don't have time to get into how these statistics were generated, but in studying literally hundreds of parishes from throughout the Greek Orthodox Archdiocese of America and distilling their financial statements and breaking it down into a financial stewardship model that I've developed, what you see in the one I'm circled at the top is, on average, Greek Orthodox parishes in America generate 52% of their total income directly from their stewards in the form of direct stewardship. That's the percentage I want you to remember. I then looked at 2010. The total number of income from all Greek Orthodox parishes as reported to the Archdiocese was a little over 230 million. Since I told you 52% of that came from the stewards directly in the form of their stewardship, that means that just under $120 million of that was contributed directly by the stewards. And then when you divide the entire $120 million generated from all Greek Orthodox Christians by the number of Greek Orthodox Christians, and there's a little bit of a difference of opinion. We've seen some studies that say about 500,000, 550,000, others that say about 470,000. So I use the 550,000 number. What we find out is that the typical Greek Orthodox Christian in America gives his church $218 per person per year. $218 per person per year. When you match that up against other statistical averages, what you find out is that the U.S. Christian average by one study, and there are different studies out there, was $880 per person per year to their churches, or 400% higher than our Greek Orthodox brothers and sisters. And if you looked at just the evangelical Protestant subsection of that, we see that their average per person per year giving is about $1,165 or 500% higher. Now, I use this as just one analogy and one piece of data for our Greek Orthodox brothers and sisters to demonstrate the massive capacity, because go back to the Pew study. They are the third highest income earners in the United States, top quartile, but when it comes to giving to the churches, they're in the bottom quartile. So that's not a cause for alarm that some people think. I think it is a wonderful and extraordinary call for opportunity that we have available to us. I kind of do another comparison out there, and again, this is just focused on the Greek Orthodox, but you can apply it to any faith-based community. I talk about then versus now, the Yaya and Papu generation. Those are the Greek words for grandfather and grandmother. In most cases, that's the immigrant generation to America. Now, in my case, my father was an immigrant, but for most people, it was their grandparents who immigrated. Back then, the immigrants came with limited education. Today, in the Greek Orthodox world, we have, by some measure, the fourth highest level of educational attainment. In income, they were immigrants, they were laborers, they were merchants, they were restaurateurs. In today's America, we have the third highest level of economic attainment. But when you look at the average tray contribution, when the tray was passed around, for our grandparents, it was $1, and unfortunately today, it is still $1. And at the bottom of this chart, I put a little frame of reference in there. In 1922, I chose that just because that was when one of my grandparents immigrated. And when you look at that, the dollar that they were putting in the tray is the equivalent of about $13.70 today. And when I first started going to church with my grandmother every Sunday, and she would give me $1 to put in the tray, when I forward that up, look at the numbers for just inflation alone now, that's the equivalent of about $7.52 a year. Per day. So if you look at it for just inflation, just looking at inflation as one tool, what we find out is that we're not even keeping pace with that immigrant generation with our level of generosity and contribution. And that's something we've got to fix. And I jokingly say, so what are the two bonus questions today? Are what is the most impactful invention that Greek Americans came up with to save their churches, and when did they invent it? And the answer is, of course, the Greek festivals or the food festivals. And every different faith-based organization is a different version of the same story. And in the Greek tradition, it was really only invented in the late 1970s and early 1980s. Some parishes had things before then, but for the most parishes, it came about in the late 70s or early 80s. And they did that because, quite frankly, they needed more money, and then they justified it by a lot of other explanations. Oh, we're sharing our heritage and we're sharing our faith. But in reality, it was all about the money at that point. And we started a steady decline in where we needed to go, and we've got to turn that decline around, and that's part of what we're going to talk about in this Igniting the Flame of True Stewardship program. Now, enough about the spirituality challenge and the income challenge. Let me just give you a quick little blow through the numbers challenge. The Pew Forum did a U.S. religious landscape survey that was absolutely phenomenal. It's a very thick and rich study. I encourage you to look at it. But I'm going to give you the Bill Marianis Cliffs Note version, 2 summary conclusions. The first one, they concluded that, quote, constant movement characterized the American religious marketplace, as every major religious group was simultaneously gaining and losing adherents, which led to their final conclusion that I want to share with you today, that religion in the United States is often described as a vibrant marketplace, where individuals pick and choose religions that meet their needs, and religious groups are compelled to compete for members. A religious marketplace? A vibrant marketplace? Is there anything in there, my brothers and sisters, that sounds like Christ's church? Not to me. We've lost sight of what we need to do, and that's why we need to ignite the flame of true Christian stewardship in your lives and in your parish communities. There's this wonderful little cartoon from cartoonchurch.com where you see a group of people leaving the church saying, "We are leaving because we do not like the way things are done." And an equal number coming in the other door saying, "We are arriving because we did not like the way things were done somewhere else." We need to stop that revolving door. We need to give them the spiritual nourishment and food that they need. We need to give them the opportunity to engage and live their stewardship callings, and to find a home, a community, a church community that they can truly engage in a big part of their lives. And when we do that, we'll solve all of our stewardship problems, including that financial problem that so heavily weighs on your shoulders. When we start to look at the numbers, in the year 2010, there were just about 145 million members of churches in America. And that was a 1.05% decline from the prior year. In 1 year, we lost 1% of our membership across all churches in America to get it down to just under 146 million. The more striking problem there was the conclusion that the direction of membership, whether it was increasing or decreasing, had remained very stable. In other words, if your church was growing, it continued to grow. If your church was declining, it continued to decline year after year after year. The house is on fire in many Christian denominations, and we've got to be the firemen and women to actually put that out. So let's look at some data to see which are the major denominations that are declining and which ones that are increasing. So the chart you see in front of you are a selected portion of the top 25 denominations. This information is self-reported, and not every denomination updates that information year after year after year. So we're just picking some of the top 25 that are actually reporting and updating their data. The first number you see is where they ranked in the size of the denomination in the United States. So you see that the Southern Baptist Convention is the second largest Christian denomination in America. And they reported, just in 1 year, 2010 to 2011, a decline in about 0.5% of their membership. The third largest was the United Methodist Church, that reported a 1% decline. In 7th place were the Evangelical Lutheran Church, that reported about a 2% decline. Then the Presbyterian Church, that reported a 2.5 or 2.61% decline. The Lutheran Church, just over 1%. The Episcopal Church reported almost a 2.5% decline, again in 1 year. The American Baptist Church, a little over 1.5%. And the United Church of Christ, 2.83%. That's 1 year. And the problem is these trends have been continually declining year after year after year. Now, some of the major reporting denominations are increasing. I don't want to get into a theological conversation or discussion and whether some folks would consider some of these groups as religious groups by their definition or not. This is just the self-reporting data that we get from the National Council of Churches. The largest denomination in America is the Roman Catholic Church, and they actually grew in that one-year period by 0.5%. But you have to look a little bit behind that numbers. When you look behind that number, what you find is that all of that growth came as a result of immigration. The Hispanic immigration and the Asian immigration is the reason why the Roman Catholic Church was able to report an increase in membership. If you factor out the immigration impact, as you would for all the rest of the denominations which did not have a major immigration impact, what you find is the steady state decline in their steady state membership. So again, they would fall in the exact same category with the other mainline denominations. So let's look at the other ones that are actually growing. The Mormon Church, the Church of Jesus Christ of the Latter-day Saints, grew by almost 1.5% in 1 year. The Assemblies of God grew a little over 0.5%. The Jehovah's Witnesses grew over 4%. The Church of God, the Cleveland, Tennessee group, grew by 0.38%. And the Seventh-day Adventist Church grew by 4.3%. So you see a variety of different denominations, and again, some folks would say, well, that's not consistent with my faith-based tradition, but they're growing. And the mainline Christian churches in America are declining. And this doesn't even include a lot of the very significant, rapidly growing, and now very large individual denominations. Folks who you see sometimes on television filling auditoriums full of faithful people that are engaging in the life there. They continue to grow while mainline Christian churches continue to decline. Now, for those of you who, like me, are of the Greek Orthodox tradition, we don't self-report statistics on a general basis. So I've gone to the Archdiocesan website, and what I see is here's the decline in baptisms, and you see that line showing a steady decline in baptisms. In chrismations coming into the church, again, you see a little bit of a rocky road, but a general trend towards decline. When you look at weddings, you see some significant declines in weddings that are taking place within the Greek Orthodox Church. And then about the only thing that's kind of growing are deaths, as demonstrated by funerals. Although I do want to commend everybody, in the year 2011, we died at a slower pace. So I don't know what we did in 2011, but thumbs up on that. Let's keep that up. Unfortunately, that was a one-year trend, and we're more than making up for it as we go on. I've now seen the updated data on that for the current year, and again, the trend lines are all the same. All the sacraments are going down, membership is going down, and deaths are going up. So here's the bottom line of the sin challenge, the spirituality challenge, the income challenge, and the numbers challenge. Church membership is declining. Church sacraments are declining. Church contributions are declining. Church member spirituality is declining when we measure it, and the vast majority of us aren't even measuring it. Church relevance in our daily lives is declining, and church disengagement and disaffiliation by youth is actually increasing, as well as membership death increasing and dependence on festivals and other fundraisers. Whew! Now what, Ollie, with all that bad news, do you have any secrets? And the answer is yes, my brothers and sisters. Here are the top 3 techniques demonstrated in picture of what's going on in mainline Christian churches today. It's what we call the FUD, F-U-D factor. Fear, uncertainty, and doubt. We're either screaming about it, sticking our heads in the sands, or playing woe is me. That time has passed. It's time now to start igniting the flame of true Christian stewardship, first in your life and in your faith-based community. As we're admonished in Luke 10, you have now been called as one of the 70 disciples who have been called to go and make 70 more disciples and 70 more disciples behind that. We finished the first program of understanding that we've gotten stewardship all wrong. It's not just about our money, but we're facing an acute spirituality, income, and numbers challenge. And now it's time to move on and understand what is true Christian stewardship, and that's what we're going to cover in the second program. Thanks, and God bless.